Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. My name is Amy and I'm pregnant with our third child, 30 weeks along, and I just want to share with y'all today some things about birth. If y'all have been on my channel, y'all know I'm passionate about sharing these types of things, but I have not always been so researched and passionate about this kind of stuff. So just kind of want to take you back a few years as to where this all started, what kind of jump started my research, my path on this journey, and also give you some tips for those of you mamas who might be having a hospital birth but want to have a more approach where you listen to your own body and you aren't having as many of those interventions that hospitals oftentimes like to force upon us, especially in a low-risk pregnancy. So I'll try to keep our story as short as possible. It's a very long story. My first labor was in total 77 hours from start to finish, so I'll try to keep it running along and intertwine those tips within. But it's a good story and hopefully y'all can get some insight out of it, and also some tips on how to manage your birth, get through your birth with as least interventions as possible. Let's take it back about 3.5 years ago to where this journey really all began. We had just gotten married and found out we were pregnant with our first child about 1 month into our marriage. Just started out the pregnancy like anybody else in Western America, Western medical culture. We went to our first prenatal visit at I think 7 weeks, and we did all the normal things, the normal ultrasounds. We did the normal talking about prenatals, talking about what to eat, what not to eat. Everything was just strictly routine as how it usually is in our culture today. And it wasn't until our second prenatal visit, so I was probably about 12 to 14 weeks along, and I was sitting in with my nurse at that particular clinic, and she was just asking me these normal questions, and one of the questions was, do you plan to have an epidural? And not to say anything negative about that nurse or that doctor, because I absolutely loved my OB and the nurse that worked with her for that pregnancy. They were phenomenal, and that was probably just strictly a routine question that she just asked all pregnant mamas. But I remember answering it like, well, yeah, I guess I'll have an epidural. Doesn't everybody have an epidural? And I just kind of went along about my day. As we were driving home though, it started hitting me. I was like, why did they really need to know if I was gonna have an epidural when I'm literally 7-8 months out from having this baby? Why do they need to already know that? And it just didn't sit well with me. And that just pretty much jump-started all of the research that brings us to where we are today. I started researching epidurals in birth. Are they necessary? Can my body really do this? I mean, we all know our bodies can do this if we just trust them. Women have done this for hundreds of thousands of years before epidurals even existed. And it just was like, do I really have to have the epidural? Like, first of all, why does she know if I need an epidural? Second of all, do I really need it? So I remember just researching everything I could. That just one thing led to another, and on the way to our next appointment, so it was about a month of me just personally researching myself, all of these things about birth, all of these interventions that are pushed upon us in the hospital birth setting. And it had been about a month of me just delving in. And it wasn't until that next prenatal visit, I was driving there with my husband, and I remember telling him, you know how that nurse asked me last time if I was gonna have an epidural? And I just said, yeah, because doesn't everybody have an epidural? He was like, yeah, I remember that. And I was like, well, I don't think I'm gonna have one. And I remember him being like, okay, well, go right ahead, but I've seen you stump your toe and I know how much that hurts you. You think you can have a baby without pain medication? But at that point, again, he was kind of skeptical. He was like, who even has babies without epidurals anymore? And you could see his skepticism. He was like, I don't even know if that's really gonna happen, but I'll support your dreams. And he did, and it just trickled from there. So this leads me into my first tip for going into a hospital setting to have your birth. If you are wanting specific things within that birth, you need to be researching them yourself. Don't rely on the nurses or the doctor to tell you these things, or if you're hiring a doula, which I'll get to in a minute, don't rely on someone else to offer you these options or tell you these options. Your number one line of defense going into that birth in a hospital setting is going to be research. And I will leave many links down below of things I was researching during that time, pretty much the entire pregnancy. And I promise you guys, once you start researching one thing, it's going to lead you to question another thing and then another thing, and you're just going to be continuing on this cycle of learning so much that you can about birth. Be so absorbed in learning about birth as you are in planning the nursery, picking out outfits for your new baby. I say this all the time. We have it so backwards in our culture. We spend so much time planning the nursery, picking out paint, picking out rocking chairs, picking out cradles, picking out outfits, picking out pacifiers and bottles, and we don't even research birth. That is the most important thing. That's how your baby is going to get into this world. So you should be an expert at this. I would even go as far to say is you should be so researched in birth that you would feel comfortable going into a friend's birth or a family member's birth and serving as their doulist, providing them support, knowing what you should do in this scenario to help baby get to position. So research, research, research. That is my number one first tip for going into any birth, but even more so going into a hospital birth. Your body is going to naturally know what to do in birth if you let it be. But in a hospital setting, you're going to be bombarded with this, this, and this. And if you are not researched in what this causes and what this causes and what this leads to, you're just going to be kind of trickling down into that intervention, that cascade of intervention. So I was researching everything for that birth. I was teaching my husband things. I was talking to him about it. And as I started researching more and he started learning more with me, he kind of became much more on board and was like, yeah, you really can do this without an epidural. You don't have to have that baby. So he became so much more supportive throughout the birth as I was just teaching him things that I was learning. So also get your husband on board as well in your research. So that was pretty much my entire first pregnancy. That just kind of started the path of where we are today. So at 36 weeks, I went in for a prenatal visit. My doctor was very aware of my wishes in birth, that I wanted as little interventions as possible. I didn't want to be messed with in birth. I wanted them to just kind of leave me alone, let my body do what it needed to do. So she knew my wishes. At 36 weeks, we had one of those little scans, and they basically told me that my baby was in harm and that we needed to induce that day at 36 weeks. And I was like, hold on now. Can you give me some legitimate reason of why you think we need to induce? And she gave me some reasons, and I was like, okay, but I just don't think that's reason enough to induce. I feel like my baby's fine. I have motherly instincts. I have God-given instincts. I think my baby's okay. Can we at least get a second opinion before you decide to induce me tonight? And so she agreed. And after the second opinion, everything was fine. So that's my next tip there is rely on your instincts. We were given motherly instincts. God gives us instincts, and listen to those instincts. So I just think back, if I had not listened to my gut there, listened to my instincts, I probably would have had an induction at 36 weeks. And no telling what could have happened with that outcome there. It could have all been perfectly fine, but there could have been a lot of NICU stay. There could have been a lot of complications there. So a lot of times they're going to see one little thing, and it's just easier for them to go ahead and force the induction, to force the baby to come. So there's a huge money-making market in birth. If you would like to watch the documentary called The Business of Being Born, I highly, highly, highly recommend any mama watching it who is pregnant. Whether it's their first, second, third baby, I like to rewatch it before every birth I have because it's just so informative on the money market centered around birth in our culture today. It's just astronomical how crazy it is. So listening to your instincts, listening to your gut, that kind of was how I approached that when she was like, okay, we're going to induce. I was like, okay, wait, I feel the baby's fine. Let's at least get a second opinion. Everything turned out fine, and we continued along with the pregnancy. So let's jump ahead to 41 weeks and 1 day. So when you're past your due date under OB care, they start to get a little antsy and wanting to induce, wanting you to do this and this and this. They want to do sweeps. They want to do all these things to help you get moving along and have that baby. They don't want you going much past 40 weeks if you've ever been in that situation. And if you did not know, the average date that women go into labor, spontaneous labor, is around the 41-week mark. For first-time mamas, I think it's actually 40 weeks and 5 days. So around 41 weeks is more the average of when women spontaneously go into labor. So technically, I wasn't even that far past my due date. And they were like, all right, baby, your placenta is wearing down. Baby is in distress. We need to get this baby out. So again, I had this instinct, like I already mentioned. My baby was fine. It was kind of a lull of our afternoon. I had just had a snack. They had done an ultrasound, and he didn't move quite as much as they would have liked him to. But I knew my baby. I knew his patterns. I knew that anytime after I ate, he was very active while I was eating, and then after I ate, he just kind of chilled out and relaxed. And when they were doing that ultrasound was when he was chilled out, relaxed. So basically, I was guilted into going ahead and forcing an induction. It was right before the weekend. They told me that my baby would possibly die if I went through the weekend and did not have a baby. So here is where the cascade of interventions begins. allowing a forced induction. Now, this is not medical advice. There are definitely cases where induction is necessary, where cesareans are necessary. But looking back in my low risk pregnancy, I don't believe it was. We had a great outcome, but not without a lot of stress and anxiety through the entire process. So basically I was told I needed to induce that night. I was crying, tears running down my face, talking to my husband, talking to my mom, and they were like, well, they say it's necessary. You might want to do it. I mean, what would you do if something did happen to your baby and you went home? So basically I was guilted into the induction, started the cascade of intervention, started out with a cervical balloon. That didn't do enough to please the doctors. So then I was put on Pitocin at a very, very low dose. But I was adamant about the dosage of Pitocin. So when they put you on Pitocin, they have different levels they can start you on. I was insistent on the lowest level. I was very kind in all of my wishes, but very confident. The nurses were usually very willing to accommodate what my wishes were. So though I was put on Pitocin, and that was not fun, it was on the lowest dosage, and I just was trusting that my body would kind of just jump start itself and kick start labor. So we were on the cervical balloon and the Pitocin for 2 days, so almost 48 hours before anything started happening. My body truly was not ready to have that baby yet. And when your body is not ready, or when you're in a stressed state, your body is not going to go into labor. So I was already in that setting of I was not comfortable with how I was being induced. My body wasn't ready in itself, so labor was not starting, and it was just a very stressful time. And I truly believe if I had waited a couple more days, my body would have went into labor on its own, and we could have avoided many of these things that come with our story. The next tip in there is to be confident but also kind in the wishes that you are wanting for your birth to the nurses and your doctor. If you go in there very demanding and rude, they're probably not going to be as likely to work with you. But if you're kind but confident in what you want and your wishes, they're much more likely to accommodate you and work with you for your birth. I was already out of the norm because I'd seen moms come in and out, going in and out of this floor that had already had their babies. And I felt like that episode of Friends where Rachel is having her baby and she keeps seeing these moms go in and out, in and out, in and out, and she's still like 2 centimeters. And that was truly us. My husband joked and I joked about it the whole time, that we were literally just sitting in there and everybody else was having a baby and going home, and we still had not even had the baby. So with that being said, I truly believe that if you allow your body to go into spontaneous labor and don't agree to a forced induction unless it is truly medically necessary, always listen to your gut instinct. I mean, of course, listen to what your doctor is saying. I'm not giving medical advice here, but I truly believe that I caused a lot more stress and anxiety on my body by allowing that forced induction and not giving it the couple more days that it needed for my baby to get into optimal position. So another thing there, helping baby get into optimal position before you go into that hospital birth is going to make the birth go a lot quicker. I don't believe my baby was in optimal position. I've been doing exercises and routines to help baby get there, but not nearly as much as I know now about helping baby get into position. I talk a lot about spinning babies in chiropractic care. That is our 2 keys to getting our baby into the optimal birth position. And if baby is not in optimal birth position, it is not going to push down on that cervix and dilate you. It could be in a funky position, and you could be having weird back labor or pelvic labor, just weird sensations of pain. If baby is in the proper position, my next tip is basically just get baby into proper position. Hospitals, doctors are not really gonna inform you in all of this. It's kind of just something you have to learn and research yourselves. Practice it at home, these positions to help baby maneuver baby. Do spinning babies throughout your entire pregnancy to help baby make room for baby in your pelvic area, and that birth is going to go much more quickly. So we had a lot of stalls, I believe, in my birth because first of all, we forced the induction, we forced my cervix to dilate, we forced my body to contract with Pitocin, and I still don't think baby was in optimal position. He needed to shift just a little bit. So fast forward a few days, we're now on day 3. I had finally dilated to about 6 or 7 centimeters. We were still just kind of stalled out. They checked me and they did confirm that my baby's head was slightly tilted to the back, or I don't remember exactly, slightly tilted to where he wasn't optimally pushing on my cervix to dilate me. So they pretty much told me I was now like on the clock, that if he didn't rotate, my water had already broken, I was on the clock. If I did not have him within so many hours, I was going to be forced to have an epidural or potentially a C-section. So that was another very stressful thing to hear from a mama who wanted as little interventions as possible. And it just goes to show you that That first intervention of the cervical balloon led to the next intervention of Pitocin, led to this next intervention of a threat of an epidural, to the next intervention of a threat of a C-section if the epidural didn't allow me to fully dilate. So it's just like this cascade of effects that when you get yourself into that setting, it's almost inevitable that you're just gonna roll down it if you are not prepared and research. So back to my tip number one, research, 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 research. Be kind and confident in your wishes. Trust your body. Get baby into optimal position. And hopefully you can avoid this cascade of effects that I was put into. So I haven't really talked much about a doula yet, but that is also a tip I want to add here is hire a doula. They are irreplaceable in the birth setting, especially in a hospital birth setting. I truly think they're amazing at a home birth too. We actually haven't had our doula at our home birth because she wasn't available, but we had her at our hospital setting. We absolutely loved her. She was a lifesaver at helping with counter pressure, hip presses. When my husband would tire out from something, she would take over. There were times when my husband would be doing hip presses. Y'all can read all about this on Spinning Babies, by the way. These different exercises you can do to relieve pressure in labor. He would be doing hip presses. She would be doing warm compresses on my bottom because that is a thing. She was just phenomenal, and she was just another advocate there for me. I had my husband who was knowing what I wanted. He was very, very confident and firm in what I wanted to the doctors and the nurses, but I also had her as well. Just another kind, compassionate woman who had been through what my body was going through. She knew what I was going through. All of my nurses that were there, and I went through a range of nurses because I was there for a total of 5 days. All of those nurses had had epidurals, so they really couldn't help me in this natural process of what can I do here, what can I do here. So my doula was truly irreplaceable in that setting. I highly, highly, highly recommend having a doula in a hospital birth setting, in any birth setting, but especially a hospital birth setting. So through lots of maneuvers with my doula, we did side presses, we did Rebozo ball, we did the peanut ball, we did so many different mechanisms, so many different exercises and maneuvers to try to help baby move, dilate my cervix, and get him to come down where I could avoid that epidural. Because at this point, my body was tiring out. It was a very long process. My body just needed some time to get baby ready for birth, and it was just fighting all of these things they were trying to put it into. And through all of that, I was wearing down. I was getting more and more tired. I was being able to sleep less and less each night. So keeping your rest and hydration and nutrition up is important too. A lot of times in a hospital setting, they're not going to let you eat during birth, but I was also very, very adamant about that. I was insistent that I was able to eat food during birth, and they allowed it. I don't know if that's going to be true in all hospital settings because they're usually pretty persistent that you don't eat anything during labor, but that was something I knew was important. If I did not have energy and hydration and nutrition in my body, I could not sustain this marathon called labor. So during that time, we were doing all these exercises that I had already practiced at home. So another tip I have is to research these exercises, these maneuvers beforehand, and practice them with your husband or your doula, so that when you are in the actual moment and you need to do these things, maybe to help baby move or to alleviate some pain during labor, you already kind of know what to expect. So practicing these scenarios, these exercises, maneuvers beforehand is another huge tip I have before you are put into the hospital setting. And these nurses and doctors are gonna be like, well, okay, go ahead and try your natural stuff, but if you're ready for this epidural, I have it right here. And I'm not hating on the medical world because the medical world is amazing when we need that, but in a low risk, healthy mama, all of these interventions are just not necessary. That's just what I'm trying to present here. And I was pushed, they were pushed upon me through this labor. And through research and confidence and kindness, I was able to avoid many of them. It wasn't a completely intervention-free birth because I did have the induction, I did have the cervical balloon, I did have the Pitocin, but other than that, it was pretty low intervention birth for a very, very, very long duration. There was just a lot that could have probably been avoided if I had let my body go into spontaneous labor, like my gut instinct was telling me. Listen to those instincts, mamas. Finally, mid-afternoon, baby had finally come down. I was 10 centimeters. I was ready to push, and they told me I could push. My body immediately rejected. And that's another thing I want to advise. If they tell you to push and you don't feel like you're ready to push, if you're not on epidural and you can feel everything, don't push, because a lot of times you can create a cervical lip. I don't actually know if that's what happened to me, but I could kind of guess that could be what happened because labor kind of stalled out again after that little push. What'll happen is you push, baby comes down, causes a little lip on your cervix. That can just kind of cause baby to kind of halt back or draw back up and stall labor out. So once I felt my body was ready, I did start pushing. It's called the fetal ejection. You just kind of allow your body to push with contractions. I remember they were counting to me 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 10. They're like, push this long. And I was like, I remember feeling like, I don't feel like I need to push for this full 10 seconds. This feels kind of silly. After having a home birth this previous year and planning for another home birth now, it is kind of silly to push for those 10 seconds. They're mainly coaching women who are in an epidural and they can't feel everything. But I remember being like, I'm kind of done pushing now, guys. And they're like, oh, okay, well, you can stop. And I was like, well, how did y'all know how to push? And they're like, we didn't. We had an epidural. So again, having that doula there, and my doula was over on the side, just like, you'll know when to push, Ammie. You'll know, your body will tell you. And it is true. Your body is going to tell you when to push. It's going to tell you when to stop. It's going to kind of push on its own, honestly. You don't really have to push the baby out. There's something called the fetal ejection reflex, and your body just pushes your baby out. And that's actually what happened at my home birth. But at my hospital birth, I did not know this. I was just kind of listening to them coaching me through it, counting to 10. Thinking it was kind of silly, but I didn't really know what else to do because I was a newbie at this. I had never done it before. But listen to your body. Another tip I have in here, if your body's telling you that something doesn't feel right, or pushing in this position doesn't feel right, or pushing for this amount of time doesn't feel right, if they're telling you to do something, listen to your body. You are delivering your baby. They are not delivering your baby. They are just there for assistance if necessary. You are delivering your baby ultimately. Not your doctor, not your husband, not your doula, not your midwife. You and your baby are working together to bring that baby into this world. Listen to your body, listen to your baby, listen to the contractions, listen to it. You don't have to listen to what everyone is telling you around you, trying to coach you through it. Yes, their intentions are well, but many times in a hospital setting, they had not seen a truly non-intervention birth. So they kind of don't really know how to help you in that situation. So listen to your body. That was another little tip I had, is just not listening to every little step they're telling me to do along the way through the pushing phase. So my son gets here, he's perfectly fine. All of those scares about him being in distress were basically bogus. Ultrasounds pick up inaccurate readings all the time. I talk about that in another birth video. Back to listening to your instincts. Again, we had a great outcome. My son got here. It was a very long process, but if I had listened to my instincts back at the very beginning of that, I probably would have cut out a lot of that length of time in labor and a lot of that stress and anxiety that was put on myself and my husband throughout the process. But nonetheless, that is our story. It's what led us to where we are now. After that, I just continued to research birth more. I knew there had to be a better way to birth, and that led me to home birth with my last little girl and what we are planning for now with this baby, who will be here in about 10 weeks. And I just hope this has been helpful to you to hear some tips on how to go into a hospital setting and have a low intervention or non-intervention birth in that environment. Because yes, the hospital is amazing when you need them, but our bodies are even more amazing when left alone to birth spontaneously, whether it be at home, in a birth center, in a hospital, and just do what God created our bodies to do. So the idea for this video actually came from one of my followers who watched another one of my pregnancy options videos. She was planning a hospital birth and wanted to know some tips for going into that setting for a low intervention or least intervention possible birth. And I also recently did a podcast interview with Rachel from the Natural Birth Show, and it just sparked so much joy talking about this with her that I wanted to create the video for my personal channel. If you want to listen to our interview, I'll link it down below for you guys. She has an amazing podcast, and it was so fun interviewing with her. But it kind of just reminded me that there's so many women who want low intervention, least intervention, no epidurals, no medication during birth, but they're in that hospital setting and they just don't really know how to maneuver that or how to ask for what they want. So hopefully these tips are helpful to you. I know that birth centers and home births are not possible for all mamas, but you can have a beautiful birth in a hospital setting. Just go in there confident, know your research, have your doula, have your partner behind you, and you can and you will have a beautiful hospital birth. So please let me know down below if you're an expectant mama and how far along you are. I love connecting with you guys and hearing about your pregnancy journeys, and I'm just wishing and praying all the best for you guys. I have lots of other pregnancy related content on my channel and more coming as I'm finishing out this pregnancy, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of my new videos, and I will see y'all in a future one.